Hello everyone, my name is Nicolas and today I'll be talking about a topic which I assume most of you will be familiar with. This is the Civil Rights Movement. More specifically, the Greensboro sit-ins and the different perspectives that were presented towards it and how this influenced in the, let's call it, efficiency of the movement. But first, some background, of course. Now, the Greensboro sit-ins were a series of nonviolent protests in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960, which led to the Woolworth Department store chain removing its policy of racial segregation in the southern United States. While not the first sit-in of the civil rights movement, the Greensboro sit-ins were an instrumental action and also the most well-known sit-ins of the civil rights movement. These sit-ins led to increased national sentiment at a crucial period in U.S. history. And the primary event took place at the Greensboro, North Carolina Woolworth store, which is now the International Civil Rights Center and Museum. While the Greensboro sit-ins was the most influential and significant sit-in of the civil rights movement, it was not the first. In August 1939, black attorney Samuel Wilbur Tucker organized a sit-in at the then segregated Alexandria, Virginia library. In 1942, the Congress of Racial Equality sponsored sit-ins in Chicago, as they did in St. Louis in 1949 and Baltimore in 1952. A 1958 sit-in in Wichita, Kansas, was also successful. Now, I will explain briefly the plan that was taken for this Greensboro sit-ins. It's quite simple, but you know. You see, days before the Woolworth sit-ins, the Greensboro sit-ins, the Greensboro Four, which are a group of four people, were debating on which way it'd be best to get the media's attention. These group of people were Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, S.L. Blair Jr., and David Richmond, which were all young black students at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. And they were inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. and his practice of nonviolent protest and wanted to change the segregational policies of Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina. The plan was simple, but effective. The four men would occupy seats at the local Woolworth, asked to be served, and when they were inevitably denied service, they would not leave. They would repeat this process day in and day out for as long as it would take. Their thinking was that if they could attract widespread attention to the issue, Woolworth would feel pressured to desegregate. Following store policy, staff refused to serve the black men at the whites only counter, and store manager Clarence Harris asked them to leave. However, the four freshmen stayed until the store closed that night. The next day, just as planned, more than 20 black students recruited from other campus groups joined the sit-in. Students from Bennett College, a college of black women in Greensboro, also joined. White customers heckled the black students who read books and studied to keep busy, while the lunch counter staff continued to refuse service. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, tensions rose between blacks and whites and fights broke out. In Jackson, Mississippi, students from Tougaloo College staged a sit-in on May 28, 1963, recounted in the autobiography of Anne Moody, a participant. In Coming of Age in Mississippi, Moody describes their treatment from whites who were at the counter when they sat down, the formation of the mob in the store, and how they managed to finally leave. As these sit-ins continued, tensions grew in Greensboro. Students began a far-reaching boycott of stores with segregated lunch counters. Sales at the boycotted stores dropped by a third, leading their owners to abandon segregation policies. Now you see what's effective. Most stores were soon desegregated, though in other Tennessee cities such as Nashville and Jackson, Woolworths continued to be segregated until around 1965, despite many protests. Now to the main point. Now, as you've probably heard by me, these sit-ins had a lot of different perspectives. Of course, there was the whites' perspectives, which, now it sounds bad when I say it, but it was kind of demonizing. It was just straight up bad. They would heckle and attack the students who were just passively reading an active, how do I call it, interest. They were just trying to learn more, which in my opinion is just a noble cause, is the noblest cause you can look for. But there was not only this. Of course, you would expect the African American people to show a more, how do I call it, acceptive approach to this. However, not all of them did. You see, there was one waiter at a store who told him that this was not a good idea, that in fact, yes, this is contradicting. He was against the Greensboro Syrians. He saw that this was truly inefficient and it just sabotaged the civil rights movement. Just as this contradicting perspective, there was also a white woman who told him, who told the participants of the sit-ins that, to put in simple words, they were doing a great job, that they should do this more, and that she thought that this was a great idea. Again, really contradicted at the time. Now, I must talk, of course, about the impact of these perspectives. You see, because that's what's important. Despite the sometimes violent reaction to the sit-ins, these demonstrations eventually led to positive results. For example, the sit-ins received significant media and government attention. When the Woolworth sit-in began, the Greensboro newspaper published daily articles on the growth and impact of the demonstration. The sit-ins made headlines in other cities as well, as the demonstration spread throughout the southern states. A Charlotte newspaper published an article on February 9th of 1960 describing the statewide sit-ins and the resulting closures of dozens of lunch counters. Furthermore, on March 16, 1960, President Eisenhower I'm sorry, President Eisenhower expressed his concern for those who were fighting for their human and civil rights, saying that he was deeply sympathetic with the efforts of any group to enjoy the rights of equality and that they are guaranteed by the Constitution. Also, this sit-in was a contributing factor in the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which, of course, as its name says, was a group of students, a coalition of students, so to say, that would just organize more of these things, just nonviolent protests. To move on, in many towns, the sit-ins were successful in achieving the desegregation of lunch counters and other public places. Nashville students who started their sit-ins in a few days after the Greensboro group attained desegregation of the downtown department store lunch counters in May 1960. The media picked up this issue and covered it nationwide, beginning with lunch counters and spreading to other forms of public accommodation, including transport facilities, art galleries, beaches, parks, swimming pools, libraries, and even museums around the South. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 mandated desegregation in public accommodations. Over 70,000 people took part in the sit-ins. They even spread to the northern states, such as Ohio and the western state of Nevada. Students protested about segregated swimming pools, lounge counters, libraries, transport facilities, museums, art galleries, parks, and beaches. By simply highlighting such practices, the students can claim to have played a significant part in the history of the civil rights movement. In 1993, a four-seat portion of the lounge counter was acquired by a Smithsonian institution. The International Civil Rights Center and Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, contains the full rest of the lunch counter in its original footprint inside the store, along with the photos of the original four protesters, a timeline of the events, and headlines from the media. The street south of the site was renamed February 1 Place in commemoration of the date of the first Greensboro sit-in. In conclusion, the different perspectives that these Greensboro sit-ins took were, of course, most of them were just according to intuition. Whites did not like them, and blacks did. However, there were, because we are human people, there was a great variety of perspectives. Black people thinking it was inefficient, it actually damaged the civil rights movement, and white people who at the time sympathized with black people, I assume, and who thought this was a great idea, as they thought that blacks also needed rights and equality. In conclusion, these perspectives and these sit-ins had an enormous impact, not only because they caused desegregation of that one lunch counter how do you call it, franchise, but also because they started a much bigger movement of sit-ins. As I said before, the papers covered this not only statewide but nationwide. Thank you. That would be all.